The forks at Aurelia, New York's most exclusive 3-Michelin-star restaurant, are solid silver. The silence is worth more than gold. Into that silence steps Julian Blackwood, a man who moves markets with a single phone call, his Tom Ford suit, a whisper of absolute power. With him is his 7-year-old son, Leo. And in the middle of a $4.2 billion merger meeting, the boy begins to cry. It's not a tantrum. It's a sound of profound, world-ending grief. As the billionaire fumbles, his empire and his composure cracking, a single waitress steps out of the shadows, risks her job, and changes everything by saying 7 simple words. Aurelia was not a restaurant. It was a cathedral built to worship money. Tucked away on the Upper East Side, its reservation list was a ledger of the global elite. Julian Blackwood didn't just have a reservation. He owned the corner table, the one encased in 3 sides of soundproofed glass overlooking a private garden. It was here he finalized his kills. Tonight's kill was the absorption of Aerodyne, a legacy aerospace firm. Across from him sat Marcus Thorne and 2 silent partners from Kensington Capital. On the table, an amuse-bouche of caviar and gold leaf sat untouched. And next to Julian, in a miniature custom-tailored suit, sat Leo. Leo was supposed to be the prop, the symbol of legacy, the well-behaved heir. Julian's assistant, Jennifer, had prepped him. "Your father has a very important meeting, Leo. We must be very quiet." For the first 20 minutes, Leo was a ghost. He stared at the single white orchid in the center of the table. Julian was in his element, his voice a low, confident purr. "The restructuring is simple. We absorb the R&D division, we liquidate the redundancies, and the Q4 profit margin skyrockets. It's clean." Marcus Thorne, a man with a face like worn leather, leaned forward. "Clean for you, Julian. Redundancies are people." "They are numbers," Julian corrected. "And the numbers are sentimental. We are not." It was then that the first sound came. A tiny, choked gasp. Julian ignored it. Leo was fidgeting, his face pale. "As for the pension fund," Julian continued, "we can shunt that into a high-yield annuity." A sniffle, louder this time. Julian's eyes, the color of a winter sky, flicked to his son. He placed a heavy, warning hand on Leo's shoulder. "Leo." The name was a command, a blade. Leo's lower lip trembled violently. The investors stared. Mr. Davies, the maitre d', stiffened by the bar, his polished calm fracturing. "Julian," Marcus said, gesturing. "Is the boy all right?" "He's fine," Julian hissed through his teeth. "He's just tired." And then it happened. The quiet, polite bubble of Aurelia burst, Leo's control snapped, and a wail emerged from his small body. It was not the sharp, angry cry of a spoiled child wanting a toy. It was a deep, mournful, agonizing sound, the sound of something breaking. The entire restaurant, the senators, the shipping magnates, the old money matriarchs, fell silent. Every eye turned to the glass fortress, where the great Julian Blackwood, the surgeon of Wall Street, was losing control. "Leo, stop it," Julian whispered, his face flushing a deep, dangerous red. He was embarrassed. He was furious. "Stop this right now. You want the new tablet? The one I said no to. It's yours. Just stop crying." Leo only cried harder, shaking his head, his hands fisted in the starched white napkin. I don't want." "What? What do you want?" Julian's voice was rising. "A pony. I'll buy you a stable. Just tell me what it takes to make you quiet." The investors were gathering their portfolios. The meeting was dead. The $4.2 billion deal was evaporating because of a 7-year-old's tears. Mr. Davies began his funereal march to the table. "Mr. Blackwood, sir." Perhaps the young man is ill? We have a private lounge. He is not ill, Julian snapped, grabbing Leo's arm. He is being difficult. From the edge of the dining room, a new waitress named Sarah Jensen watched. She had only been at Aurelia for 3 weeks. She'd been warned explicitly by Mr. Davies. You do not speak to the clients at table 12. You do not look at them. You do not exist. But Sarah wasn't watching the billionaire. She was watching the boy. She saw the way he wasn't crying at his father, but through him. She saw him look past the Patek Philippe on Julian's wrist, past the skyscrapers in the window, searching for something that wasn't there. Mr. Davies was apologizing to the Kensington team. Julian, at his absolute limit, stood up, his chair scraping violently. He was about to drag his son from the restaurant, a public humiliation that would be gossip column fodder for weeks. Mr. Blackwood? The voice was soft, clear, and absolutely unauthorized. Julian Blackwood turned. Sarah stood there, a simple silver tray in her hand, her uniform pristine. She had broken the cardinal rule. Get away from my table, Julian commanded. Mr. Davies looked like he was about to faint. Miss Jensen, Sarah did not look at her manager. She did not look at the angry billionaire. She took one step closer, knelt, and put her hand gently on the table, near Leo's. He doesn't want a pony, Mr. Blackwood, Sarah said, her voice shaking only slightly. Julian stared, incredulous. What did you say to me? Sarah finally looked up, her eyes meeting Julian's. They were not frightened. They were profoundly sad. He just misses his mum. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It was a vacuum. Mr. Davies went pale. The Kensington partners, who had been halfway out of their seats, froze. Julian Blackwood's face went through a rapid, terrifying transformation. The public-facing mask of the CEO melted, revealing a raw, white-hot rage. His hand, which had been on Leo's arm, clenched into a fist at his side. You, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, are fired. Sir, Mr. Davies stammered, rushing forward. My apologies. This is her last night, I assure you. But something had happened. Leo, who had been sobbing uncontrollably, stopped. The storm ceased. He stared at Sarah, his chest still hitching with shuddering breaths, his eyes wide and shocked. He slowly, tentatively, reached out one small finger and touched the back of Sarah's hand on the table. Julian saw the movement. The rage in his eyes faltered, replaced by a deep, unwelcome confusion. He looked from Sarah's calm, knowing face to his son's stunned one. This meeting, Julian announced to the table, his voice rough, is over. Marcus, my office, tomorrow, 10. Marcus Thorne, ever the pragmatist, simply nodded, gathered his things, and left. He'd seen Julian Blackwood navigate hostile takeovers and SEC investigations, but he'd never seen him look like this, utterly defeated. The restaurant was empty of the investors. Mr. Davies was wringing his hands. Sir, I am so sorry. I will have her escorted out immediately. Leave us, Julian commanded. Sir, get out. Mr. Davies fled. Now it was just the three of them. Julian sank back into his chair, the adrenaline gone, leaving him looking hollow. He loosened his tie, a gesture of defeat. He stared at Sarah, who was still kneeling, not moving. Who are you? He asked. It wasn't a question of her name, but of her audacity. My name is Sarah Jensen, she said quietly. I'm a waitress. No waitress says that, Julian said, motioning to his son. No waitress risks a job at Aurelia to what? Psychoanalyze my family? What do you want? Money? You think this little parlor trick will get you a payout? Leo was still quiet. He was just watching Sarah. Sarah finally stood up. She looked tired. "I don't want anything, Mr. Blackwood. I know that sound. A child who isn't crying to get something, but because they've lost something." Julian's face hardened again. "You don't know anything about my family." "I know it's November 8th, Sarah said softly. Julian's blood ran cold. He hadn't just forgotten. He had actively buried it. He had scheduled the Aerodyne merger, the most aggressive deal of his career, specifically for today. He had told his assistant to clear his schedule of all personal sentiment. It was Ilara's birthday. His late wife. The woman who had been the gravity in his orbit. The one he had failed. 6 months ago, Ilara Blackwood had died of a sudden, brutal pancreatic cancer. It took her in 8 weeks. Julian had been in Tokyo for the last 3 of them, closing a deal. He had told himself it was vital, that it was for his family's future, for Leo's future. He had been on a private jet, somewhere over the Pacific when she passed. He had told the pilot not to wake him. He hadn't been there. And today, on her birthday, he had brought their son, the son who had his mother's eyes, to this restaurant. This was our favorite table, Leo whispered, his first words in 10 minutes. He was speaking to Sarah, not to his father. "We came here for her birthday. Last year." Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. He hadn't just buried the date. He had brought his son to the very scene of the memory and used it as a backdrop for a hostile takeover. He thought Leo's silence was good behavior. It was shock. He looked at his son, truly looked at him, and saw not a difficult child, but a 7-year-old boy drowning in a grief his father had refused to acknowledge. I want to go home," Leo whispered, finally looking at his father. I want to see her room." Julian flinched, the second blow. Ilara's study, on the 3rd floor of their Upper East Side townhouse, had been locked the day after the funeral. Julian had the only key. It was a museum, a tomb. "No," Julian said, his voice automatic and harsh. "We don't go in that room. You know that. But—" Leo's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah interjected, unable to stop herself. "He doesn't need a locked room. He needs—" "You," Julian snapped, turning his pain back into anger, "are done here. You meddled. You were right. Fine. Congratulations. Now get out of my sight." Sarah paused. She looked at Leo, who looked like he was about to shatter again. She had a choice. She could leave, her job gone, and return to her own cold, empty apartment. Or she could push. "You're right," Sarah said, picking up her tray. "I am fired, so I'm not your waitress anymore, which means I can tell you the truth." Julian looked up, intrigued despite himself. "He misses his mom," Sarah said, her voice steel. "But you're letting her die twice. Once from the sickness, and again, right now, by locking her away. You're not just locking him out of her room, Mr. Blackwood. You're locking him out of you." Julian stood up. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and threw a black American Express card on the table. "My compliments to the chef," he said to the empty room. He grabbed Leo's hand, gently this time, and walked out. He didn't look back at Sarah, but as he passed the Maitre d's station, he paused. "The girl. Jensen," he said to a terrified Mr. Davies. "Tell her to be at my office. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. The Blackwood Global Headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a glass and steel spire in Midtown. The lobby was a cavern of Italian marble, so quiet you could hear the digital numbers changing on the stock ticker. Sarah Jensen, in her only good blazer, a slightly worn Anne Klein she'd bought at a consignment shop, felt like a sparrow in an eagle's nest. She was buzzed up to the 80th floor, to an office so large it had its own climate. Julian Blackwood was not sitting behind his massive desk. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down on the city he owned. He was back in his armor, a fresh suit, a new tie. The broken man from the restaurant was gone. The surgeon was back. "Mr. Davies says you're new at Aurelia," Julian said, not turning around. "He says you have no references to speak of for that level of service." "I'm a fast learner," Sarah said. "He says you listed your previous employer as the Mount Sinai Children's Hospital." Sarah stiffened. "That's correct." Julian turned. He held a single-page printout, her resume. "You were not a waitress. You were a clinical child psychologist, grief and trauma specialty. You resigned abruptly 9 months ago." He tossed the paper onto his desk. "You weren't just knowing last night. You were practiced. You profiled my son." "I saw a child in pain," Sarah corrected, "and a father trying to fix it with the wrong tools. You were offering a bribe to a boy who needed a lifeline." Julian almost smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression. "You have nerve. I'll give you that. You also cost me leverage. Kensington Capital is re-evaluating. That stunt of yours, the public breakdown, it cost me." "It seems to me," Sarah said, finding her footing, "that your son's breakdown saved him from a father who forgot his late wife's birthday." The air crackled. Julian sat down, lacing his fingers. "You're unemployed, Miss Jensen. As of last night, you live in a 1-bedroom walk-up in Astoria. You have significant legal debts. A custody battle, to be precise." Sarah's blood ran cold. He hadn't just looked at her resume. He had run a full background check. In the 12 hours since she'd left the restaurant, he had dissected her life. "Your ex-husband, a man named Mark, is suing for full custody of your son. Daniel, 8 years old," Julian continued, his voice neutral, as if reading a quarterly report. "His argument is that your burnout from Mount Sinai, coupled with your current unstable employment as a waitress, makes you an unfit mother. His new wife is wealthy. They have a house in Greenwich. You have nothing. The hearing is in 3 weeks." Sarah felt sick. She was exposed, pinned. This was how he operated. He found the vulnerability and pressed. "What do you want, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Last night was a failure," Julian said. "My failure. Not just the deal. My son." He hasn't spoken a word since we got in the car. He just sat in his room, holding a picture of his mother. I don't know the tools, as you put it." He leaned forward. "I want to hire you." Sarah blinked. "Hire me? As what? A nanny? A therapist? I don't care about the title. You're a child psychologist. Leo, you reached him. I can't. I'll pay you. Name your price." Sarah looked at the man. He was doing it again, trying to buy his way out of a problem. "My price," Sarah said, her voice hardening, "is $500,000. Julian's eyebrows shot up. "That's an aggressive salary, Miss Jensen, even for a high-end nanny." "It's not a salary," Sarah said. "It's the retainer I need to hire Martin Littman, the top custody lawyer in New York. It's the price to get my son back. You want to buy my expertise? That's the cost. You dug into my life. You know exactly what I'm up against. So let's not pretend this is a normal job offer." Julian stared at her. He saw the same steel she had shown him in the restaurant. She wasn't begging. She was negotiating. She was, for the first time, speaking his language. He nodded. "Done. The money will be in your account by noon." "That's not all," Sarah said. Julian paused. "I won't be his nanny. I won't be the woman who shields him from you or excuses your behavior. I'm not here to replace his mother, Mr. Blackwood. I'm here to help him grieve her. And that means you're part of the therapy. You don't get to outsource this." "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice wary. "It means you're home for dinner. Every night. 6 p.m., no phone. It means we have sessions. You, me, and Leo. It means you will be present. If you miss one session, if you prioritize a deal over your son, I walk. And you can keep your money. I won't win my custody battle by sacrificing your son." Julian Blackwood was a man who had never been given an ultimatum by an employee. He was the one who set the terms. Always. He looked at the picture on his desk. It was the only personal item. It was Ilara and a 5-year-old Leo, laughing in Central Park. Ilara was looking at the camera, her smile so bright it hurt. Julian had taken the picture just before he'd had to take a call. "You're home at 6, he'd always say to her. "The deal, it's complicated." "The deal is always complicated, Julian," she'd replied, her smile fading. "We're not. We're right here." "My first condition," Sarah said, pulling him from the memory, "is today. We go to your home, and you, Mr. Blackwood, are going to open his mother's room." Julian's immediate, visceral response was no. It was his one boundary, the one place his grief was pure, untouched. "That room is private," he said stiffly. "It's a prison," Sarah countered, "and you've made your son the warden of a building he's not allowed to enter. You want my help? The key." "Now." Julian stood. He walked to the window, his back to her. He was at war with himself. The part of him that was the surgeon told him to throw this woman out. She was arrogant, demanding, but the part of him that was a father, the small, terrified part that had seen his son's face last night, knew she was right. He walked to a biometric safe hidden behind a minimalist painting, pressed his thumbs to it, and took out a single, ornate brass key. He didn't hand it to her. He held it. 9 a.m., he said to his assistant over the intercom. "Cancel everything, indefinitely." He looked at Sarah. "Let's go, Miss Jensen. Let's go see the ghost." The Blackwood townhouse on 72nd and 5th was less a home than a private museum. The floors were black marble, the walls were white, and the only color came from the imposing, sterile modern art. A single housekeeper, Mrs. Peters, moved through the halls like a shadow. Leo was in the grand living room, sitting on a $50,000 sofa, still in his pajamas. He hadn't eaten. He was just waiting. When Julian and Sarah walked in, Leo's eyes immediately found Sarah. A flicker of, not hope, but recognition. He ignored his father. "Hello, Leo," Sarah said, kneeling so she was at his level. "My name is Sarah. I was the waitress from last night. Your father, he's asked me to help out for a while." Leo just nodded, his eyes fixed on the brass key in his father's hand. "Leo," Julian said, his voice stiff and unnatural. We are going to go upstairs. To your mother's study." Leo's head snapped up. He looked at his father, his expression a painful mix of fear and desperate longing. The walk up the floating glass staircase to the 3rd floor was silent. The hallway was dark. The door to Ilara's study was at the far end. It was the only door in the house made of old, dark wood. Julian had imported it from a French chateau. Ilara had always said it was too grand. Julian's hand trembled as he put the key in the lock. The click of the tumblers echoed in the cavernous hallway. He pushed the door open. The room was not what Sarah or even Leo expected. Julian had described it as a shrine. They expected white lilies, perhaps a portrait, a room preserved in amber. The room was a mess. It was a vibrant, chaotic, living space. The walls were covered not with paintings, but with floor-to-ceiling whiteboards, scrawled with numbers, logistical charts, and names. The desk was overflowing with binders labeled Shelter Logistics, Pediatric Health Initiative, and Arts Funding Q4. A massive computer array sat on a side table, monitors still blinking with financial data. Julian stopped dead. What is this? He hadn't been in this room. He had locked it the day of the funeral, assuming it was her reading room, the place she read poetry and handled invitations. What is this? He repeated, louder. Mrs. Peters, the housekeeper, had followed them. She spoke, her voice trembling. This was Mrs. Blackwood's real office, sir. She asked me not to disturb you with it. She said you were managing the real money. Julian walked, stunned, to the central whiteboard. It was a complex diagram linking Blackwood Global's charitable foundation, a foundation Julian had set up as a tax write-off and handed to Elara to keep her busy, to dozens of shelters, hospitals, and art programs. I don't understand, Julian whispered. The foundation's endowment it's $50 million. This is a logistics map for $100 million operation. Sarah was looking at the desk. She picked up a bound report. It was the Blackwood Foundation's actual portfolio. Elara hadn't just been giving Julian's money away. She had been investing it. My God, Sarah breathed. She was trading. She doubled the endowment, Julian, on her own. Julian grabbed the book. It was true. Complex derivatives, social impact bonds, microloans. It was a portfolio as sophisticated as any at his own firm. Elara Blackwood, the woman he thought of as the soul of his life, the gentle counterpoint to his ruthlessness, had been a financial shark, a brilliant one. Why didn't she tell me? Julian said, his voice cracking. I think she did, Sarah said, pointing to a small framed note on the desk. It was in Julian's own sharp, black handwriting, a note from 2 years ago. Elara, just handle the charity stuff. I'm in the middle of the K-Tech deal. Don't bother me with the small fry financials. Chat. Julian stared at his own words. He remembered writing it. He'd been annoyed. She'd come to his office, excited about something, some investment. He'd cut her off. He'd told her to handle the galas and leave the real business to him. He had been so obsessed with proving he was the provider, the genius, the surgeon, that he had never once asked his wife what she did all day. He had been jealous, not of another man, but of her contentment. He'd assumed it was because she had him. He never considered it was because she had herself. And then Leo moved. He didn't go to the desk. He didn't go to the whiteboards. He walked to a small, sunlit alcove by the window. In it sat a simple, slightly worn armchair and a small box. Leo opened the box. Inside was not jewelry or documents. It was a collection of audio cassette tapes. What are those, honey? Sarah asked gently. Leo picked one up. On it, in his mother's elegant script, was one word. Leo! He turned to his father, his eyes desperate. I can't find it. The player. Julian looked around, frantic. He saw it. On a low shelf, a simple, old-school cassette recorder. The kind Elara used to record her thoughts. Julian fumbled with the tape, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get it in. He pressed play, the sound of static. And then Elara's voice. Warm, laughing, alive. And then, my brave knight, Sir Leo, you told Mr. Grumples that dragons do eat broccoli, and that's why they can breathe fire. I think you might be the smartest dragon tamer in all of New York. It was a story she had been recording for Leo. Leo let out a sound, a tiny, broken sob, and launched himself at his father. He wrapped his arms around Julian's waist, burying his face in his suit jacket. Julian Blackwood stood frozen in the center of his dead wife's secret, brilliant life, listening to her voice fill the room, and held his son as they both wept. Sarah quietly backed out of the room and closed the door, leaving them alone. The next 2 weeks were a brutal negotiation, not for a company, but for a family. Sarah's presence in the townhouse was a quiet revolution. She didn't operate as a nanny. She operated as an advocate. Her first battle was the schedule. Julian's life was dictated by an electronic calendar, managed by 3 assistants, scheduling his time in 6-minute increments. "This is unacceptable," Sarah said, standing in Julian's home office on her 3rd day. She held a printout of his week. "You have Leo, 7:15 p.m. You've scheduled your son between a call with Hong Kong and a portfolio review." "That's his bedtime," Julian argued, not looking up from his terminal. I'm tucking him in." "No," Sarah said, unplugging his monitor. "You're checking a box. From 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., you are offline. No screens, no calls. You, Leo, and me. We eat. At a table. We talk." "That's impossible," Julian snapped. "The Asian markets are open. I'll lose millions." "Then lose them," Sarah countered. "You already lost 6 months with your son. You're about to lose the rest of his childhood. What's the P&L on that?" He stared at her. But he did it. The first dinner was an agonizing silence. Julian, stripped of his phone, had no idea what to do. He kept checking his bare wrist, where his Patek Philippe used to be. Sarah had made him remove it. "So, Leo," Julian tried. "School," Leo shrugged, moving his peas around his plate. "Did you learn numbers?" Leo nodded. Sarah sighed. "Julian, ask him about the tape. Ask him about the story. What happened to Mr. Grumples?" "Right. Mr. Grumples," Julian said, relieved to have a topic. What was his deal?" "He's not a dragon tamer," Leo said, his first unsolicited words to his father in weeks. "He's a dragon scientist," Mum said. "Oh," Julian said, "a scientist, of course. What does a dragon scientist do?" "He figures out why they breathe fire," Leo said, suddenly animated. "It's not broccoli. It's a bismuth oxide reaction in their 3rd stomach." Julian blinked. "A bismuth, right." It was a start. While she was rebuilding the Blackwood home, Sarah was fighting to keep her own. Her custody hearing was looming. The $500,000 retainer had secured Martin Littman, who was a bulldog. But Sarah's ex-husband, Mark, was playing dirty. "He's painting you as a gold digger," Littman explained over the phone. Sarah was in the Blackwood library, surrounded by Alara's research. "He's saying you abandoned a stable career due to a breakdown, and now you've attached yourself to a billionaire. He's going to make your new job look like you're an unstable opportunist." "But that's not true," Sarah whispered, frantic. "I'm working as a psychologist. I'm helping—" "It doesn't matter, Sarah," Littman said grimly. "The optics are terrible. Your employer is Julian Blackwood, the surgeon. The man's reputation isn't exactly family-friendly. The judge will see a vulnerable child, Daniel, and a choice between a stable home in Greenwich with his stepmother or a mother who works for a ruthless corporate raider. We need a character witness, a powerful one." Sarah's heart sank. She knew what he was asking. "Julian, no, I can't. That's not the deal. I'm not using him like that. He's the only one who can counter the gold digger narrative. He has to testify that you were hired for your professional skills, not something else. Think about it, Sarah. This is for Daniel." The request sat like a stone in her stomach. To ask Julian to use his power, his name for her, it felt like a violation of the very principles she was trying to instill in him. It was a transaction. That night, Julian was late. 6:15 p.m. He walked in, his phone pressed to his ear. "Look, Marcus, I don't care. Liquidate the Aerodyne shares, all of them. The deal's dead. I'm busy." He hung up and saw Sarah standing by the dining room. "You're late," she said. "I know, I'm sorry. I was fixing something." He looked exhausted. "The Kensington deal. It's done. I'm walking away." Sarah was stunned. The $4.2 billion deal? Why? "It was Ilara's birthday," Julian said, as if that explained everything. "It was a tainted deal. And besides," he motioned to the files from Ilara's office, which had now taken over the library, "I have a new fund to manage." He had spent the last week liquidating his most vulture-like assets and pouring the money into the Blackwood Foundation. He wasn't just honoring Ilara's work, he was continuing it. I need to ask you for something, Julian," Sarah said, her voice small. She explained the custody situation, the lawyer, the optics. She explained that she needed a character witness. Julian listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I see," he said. "You need me to testify." "An affidavit would be enough," Sarah said quickly. "Just something from Blackwood Global's legal department, confirming my employment." "No," Julian said. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "No? No affidavit." He picked up his phone and dialed. "Jennifer, get me Judge Harrison's clerk. Yes, that Harrison, the one presiding over the Jensen case. I want to schedule a time to speak, in person." "Julian, no," Sarah said, horrified. You can't just call the judge. That's intimidation. That's what you do." Julian held up a hand, his face uncharacteristically gentle. "I'm not going to threaten him, Sarah. I'm not going to bribe him. I'm not the surgeon." He paused, his voice softening. "I'm going as a character witness, as Julian Blackwood, a single father, who hired a professional to save his son. They want to know your character? I'll tell them. He was using his power, but it wasn't a hammer. It was a shield. For her." "Now," he said, pocketing the phone. "Let's go eat. I hear Mr. Grumples has a theory about volcanoes." The custody hearing was held in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom in White Plains. It was a closed hearing. Sarah was a wreck. Mark, her ex, sat with his new wife, both looking confident and affluent. Their lawyer, a shark from a top Greenwich firm, had just spent an hour painting Sarah as a deeply unstable woman who had latched onto a notoriously volatile billionaire. "She abandoned her son for a fantasy," the lawyer concluded. "We ask for full, unadulterated custody to protect Daniel." The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Harrison, looked at Sarah. "Ms. Jensen, your lawyer has submitted a rather unusual request for a character witness. Mr. Julian Blackwood." The courtroom door opened. Julian Blackwood walked in. He was not in his $10,000 Tom Ford armor. He was wearing a simple, dark blue suit. He looked normal. He gave Sarah a small, reassuring nod and took the stand. "Mr. Blackwood," Mark's lawyer began, smelling blood. "Is it true you met Miss Jensen when she was a waitress at Aurelia?" "It is," Julian said. "And now she lives in your home?" "She has a suite in my home, yes, as does my son's tutor and his security detail." "And what precisely is her job?" the lawyer sneered. Julian looked past the lawyer, directly at Judge Harrison. "Miss Jensen, Your Honor, is my son's primary therapist. She is, to be blunt, the person who is saving his life." The courtroom was silent. "My wife, Ilara, passed away 6 months ago," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying. I failed my son. I buried myself in my work. I was emotionally absent. I was trying to fix his grief by buying him things. I was drowning, and I was pulling him down with me. He looked at Sarah. Ms. Jensen was the only person who had the courage and the professional insight to see what was actually happening. She said my son just missed his mum. She was right. But it was more than that. I just missed his mum, and I didn't know how to do that and be a father. Mark and his new wife were staring, their narrative crumbling. Ms. Jensen, Julian continued, was hired at an executive-level salary, commensurate with her qualifications as a senior clinical psychologist, which are extensive. She did not, however, accept the job for the money. She accepted it on a set of conditions. "Objection," Mark's lawyer shouted. "Hearsay. Relevance?" "Overruled," Judge Harrison said, leaning forward. "Continue, Mr. Blackwood." Her conditions were not about her. They were about me. That I be home every night at 6 p.m., that I be present, that I attend therapy with my son, that I learn how to be his father again. She has, in 3 weeks, rebuilt my family. She is an advocate of the highest order. He turned back to the lawyer. "You paint her as an opportunist. Sir, Sarah Jensen is the only person in recent memory who has cost me money. She convinced me to walk away from a $4 billion merger because it was the wrong thing to do. Her moral compass is absolute." He finished. "I am a ruthless man, Your Honor. I have been, but I am trying to be a good father. I cannot do that without Ms. Jensen's guidance. To take her son away from her would not just be a travesty. It would be a profound, systemic mistake. She is the very definition of a fit mother. She's the one teaching me how to be a fit father." There was a long silence. Judge Harrison looked at her notes. She looked at Mark. She looked at Sarah. "I've heard enough," the judge said. "I'm reversing the temporary custody order. Ms. Jensen will retain primary custody. Mark, you will have visitation every other weekend. This case is closed." Sarah burst into tears, silent, overwhelming tears of relief. Julian stepped down from the stand. He walked over, didn't touch her, but just stood beside her until she was ready. Outside the courtroom, Sarah was catching her breath, the reality of it hitting her. She had Daniel back. "Julian," she said, I don't know how to thank you." "You did, Sarah," he said. "You're teaching me and Leo how to read Ilara's files. The foundation. We're going to build the new pediatric wing at Mount Sinai, the one she was planning." "She'd love that," Sarah whispered. I know." He looked awkward, a man still new to this language. "There's one more thing." He handed her a set of keys. "It's an apartment, 3 bedrooms, in your son's school district. It's not mine. It's the foundation's. Ilara bought it 2 years ago as a safe house for a family from one of the shelters. It's empty now. The lease is in your name. You can't be my advocate if you live in my house. You need your own." Sarah looked at the keys. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a bribe. It was independence. "What about you and Leo?" she asked. "We have dinner, 6 p.m. every night," Julian said, checking his watch. "And I'm late. I'm taking Leo to a dragon exhibit. Something about bismuth." "Julian," Sarah stopped him. He turned. "You're a good father," she said. Julian Blackwood, the surgeon of Wall Street, gave her a small, genuine smile. I'm learning. From the best." 6 months later, the light inside Aurelia was the same. It was a soft, buttery, expensive gold, designed to make everyone look flawless. The forks were still solid silver. The silence was, as ever, deep, hushed, and reverent. At least, it had been. Mr. Davies, the maitre d', stood near the grand floral arrangement, his posture as perfect as ever, but his eyes were fixed on table 12. For 6 months, he had dreaded this night. His booking system had flagged it a week ago. Blackwood, J. Table 12. 4 guests. 7 p.m. He had staffed the section with his most senior waiter, briefed the kitchen, and prepared himself for another Category 5 disaster. The night Julian Blackwood's son had broken down, the sound of that wail had echoed in Mr. Davies's nightmares. It was the sound of a billion-dollar empire, and the restaurant's pristine reputation cracking in real time. He still marveled that the waitress, Sarah Jensen, had not been blacklisted from every service job in the city. Instead, she was now sitting at table 12. She was not in her server's uniform. She was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. Her hair was down. She looked powerful. But the power wasn't borrowed from the man beside her. It was her own. Opposite her sat Julian Blackwood. The surgeon was gone. The Tom Ford armor had been replaced by a soft, dark cashmere sweater. He was still the most formidable man in the room, but the cold, lethal energy had been replaced by a grounded, focused warmth. He was leaning forward, not in a predatory negotiating stance, but in an engaged, listening one. And between them, the source of the original chaos, Leo sat next to another boy of about 9. It was Sarah's son, Daniel. The silence of Aurelia was, for the first time, being punctuated by the high, bright sounds of laughter. "No way," Daniel was saying, his eyes wide. "There is no way a bismuth oxide reaction is stable enough for sustained combustion. You're forgetting the catalyzing agent." Leo, who had transformed from a pale, silent ghost into a vibrant, slightly nerdy kid, slammed his milk glass down. "It's not just bismuth. Dad, tell him. It's the microplatinum filaments in the third stomach that act as the catalyst. That's what Mum's notes said." Julian Blackwood, a man who had once silenced a boardroom by raising an eyebrow, turned his attention from his guest. "Leo, what's our rule about platinum filaments at the dinner table?" Leo and Daniel looked at each other, confused. Julian smiled. "We wait until after the appetizer. It's polite." The boys giggled. Sarah rolled her eyes, a fond, easy gesture. "You're encouraging them, Julian." "They're problem-solving," Julian countered. "It's what we do." The fourth man at the table, Marcus Thorne, let out a low chuckle. He looked at Julian, his gaze filled with a bewildered respect. "I have to say, Julian, this is a very different meeting than our last one." "It's a very different deal, Marcus," Julian said, turning back. This was the true purpose of the dinner. It was a closing, but it wasn't the hostile takeover of Aerodyne. That deal had been scuttled, as Julian had told Sarah he would. This was something new. The board was skeptical, Marcus admitted, swirling his water. "When you announced you were liquidating your majority stake in Blackwood Capital's most aggressive funds, people thought you were having a breakdown. They thought your wife's passing had unhinged you." "A breakdown," Julian said, nodding. "Or a breakthrough. Depends on your perspective." "I wasn't unhinged, Marcus. I was realigned." "You poured nearly $9 billion into the Blackwood Foundation," Marcus pressed, turning what was, forgive me, a tax shelter vanity project into one of the largest social impact funds on the planet. Then you came back to me, to Aerodyne, not with an offer to buy, but with an offer to partner. "Ilara's idea," Julian said simply. He gestured to Sarah. Sarah leaned forward, and Mr. Davies, watching from afar, saw the dynamic instantly. She wasn't the +1. She was the co-principal. "Ilara's research was clear," Sarah said, her voice carrying the easy authority of the Foundation's new director. Aerodyne's legacy R&D division, the one Julian originally targeted as redundancy, was already 3 years into developing a new turbine for green energy desalinization. It was just underfunded. So, Julian continued, the foundation is providing the capital. A 50-year investment. Aerodyne provides the tech. We're not liquidating redundancies. We're building 2 new plants, one in Nevada, one in the Bronx. The Bronx? Marcus asked, baffled. The Foundation's new vocational training center is there, Sarah said. We'll be training the workforce to build and maintain the turbines. The profits from the Nevada plant will, in turn, fully fund the new pediatric trauma wing at Mount Sinai, the one we're naming after Ilara. She smiled, a small, sad, proud smile. It's a closed loop, sustainable, profitable, and good. Marcus Thorne sat back, stunned. My God, she planned all of this, didn't she? Your wife. Julian looked at Sarah. She built the engine. We're just turning the key. Well, Marcus said, raising his glass. Kensington Capital is in, all in. The board is, they're proud to be a part of this. You've changed the game, Julian. You're making philanthropy profitable. Or maybe you're making profit philanthropic. I can't tell which. They're the same thing, Julian said. I forgot. As Marcus put his glass down, Mr. Davies finally approached. His fear was gone, replaced by a deep, professional warmth. Mr. Blackwood. Ms. Jensen. He bowed his head slightly to Sarah, a gesture of profound respect. A pleasure to see you all. The usual, sir? Julian's usual had been a 30-day dry-aged steak, rare, and a $5,000 bottle of Petrus. He looked at the boys, who were now quietly constructing a fort out of sugar packets. I think, Julian said, we're going to start with 2 Vulcan door sundaes, with extra, he looked at Leo, lava, as an appetizer. Mr. Davies didn't even blink. An excellent choice, sir. And for you and Ms. Jensen. Coffee, Sarah said, and whatever the chef recommends for a celebration. As Mr. Davies walked away, Marcus Thorne gathered his briefcase. I'll leave you to your family. It's a privilege, Julian. Truly. He nodded to Sarah. Director, I'll have legal send the final papers to your office, not Julian's, yours. Thank you, Marcus, Sarah said, shaking his hand. The investor left, and the table, once a battleground of a $4.2 billion deal, was now just a family. The sundaes arrived. They were magnificent, obscene mountains of ice cream, chocolate sauce, whipped cream, and gold leaf, a nod to the restaurant's old ways. Leo and Daniel stared at it, spoons at the ready. Okay, Julian said, but first the new house rule. The boys groaned, but they did it. They each put their spoons down. I'm grateful, Leo said, that Daniel taught me how to actually build the volcano model, and that we're here, at Mom's table. I'm grateful, Daniel said, that Leo didn't tell my mum I definitely broke the test tube, and that Dad let me have the really big sundae. They looked at Sarah. I'm grateful, she said, her eyes finding Julian's, that I have a job I love, and that I get to see my son every single day. They all looked at Julian. Julian Blackwood, the man who had commanded armies of lawyers and traders, looked at the 3 faces watching him. His son, his partner, his new family. I'm grateful, Julian said, his voice thick, that my son cried. I'm grateful that someone was brave enough to tell me why. He looked at Sarah, and the look that passed between them was more binding than any contract. And I'm grateful, he finished, that I was smart enough to listen. For once. He tapped the table. All right, demolish it. The boys attacked the sundae with chaotic glee. Within minutes, They were a mess of chocolate and whipped cream. "So," Sarah said, sipping her coffee, "the groundbreaking for the Sinai wing is Tuesday. The press is extensive." "Let them come," Julian said. "It's Ilara's day." "They're not coming for Ilara, not really. They're coming for you. The surgeon's new heart. They're fascinated." "It's not new," Julian said quietly, watching Leo try to balance a cherry on his nose. "It was just locked. Buried. You and Leo. You dug it up. You had to let us, Julian. You had to open the door." A small dollop of whipped cream suddenly landed on Julian's cashmere sleeve. He froze. Leo and Daniel froze, their eyes wide with terror. Oh, Daniel whispered. "You got him." Julian looked at the white smudge on the dark wool. He remembered the fury he'd felt when Leo had first cried, the humiliation. He felt the shadow of it. And then he saw Sarah, her hand over her mouth, trying desperately not to laugh. Julian looked at the whipped cream. He looked at Leo's terrified face. He looked at Sarah. Slowly, deliberately, he dipped his own spoon into the volcano, scooped up a large, dripping cloud of whipped cream, and flicked it. It landed perfectly on Leo's cheek. Leo's mouth dropped open. Then, a slow, delighted, mischievous grin spread across his face. You did not." "Oh, I did," Julian said, narrowing his eyes. It was all the permission Daniel needed. He launched a spoonful at Julian, who ducked, and it hit the glass wall behind him with a satisfying splat. "Oh, it's on," Sarah laughed, as Leo retaliated. For 3 glorious, chaotic minutes, Table 12, the glass-walled fortress of finance, became a war zone of whipped cream and chocolate sauce. It was anarchy. Mr. Davies, standing by the bar, watched the entire thing. A young waiter rushed up, horrified. "Sir, Mr. Blackwood, should I—" Mr. Davies put a hand on the waiter's chest, a small, genuine smile on his face. "No, just add 4 dry cleaning vouchers to his bill and bring them another round of napkins." The laughter finally subsided. The 4 of them were a wreck. Julian's hair was sticking up, and Sarah had a streak of chocolate on her chin. Julian was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from laughing. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed this way. Maybe never. He looked at Sarah, her face bright with joy. He reached across the table, through the sticky, glorious mess of their celebration, and took her hand, his fingers laced with hers, a perfect fit. It wasn't a desperate grab for a lifeline, as it had been in Ilara's study. It wasn't the hesitant, questioning touch outside the courtroom. It was a statement, a fact. "So," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "Director of the foundation, this is not what I expected when I took that waitressing job. And this," Julian said, gesturing to the happy, messy boys and the woman holding his hand, "is not what I expected when I buried my wife. I thought that was the end." "It was," Sarah said softly. "It was the end of that story, and the beginning of this one." Julian looked at Leo, who was now explaining to Daniel, with diagrams drawn in chocolate sauce, the precise aerodynamics of a whipped cream projectile. Julian Blackwood had spent his life acquiring things, companies, assets, buildings. He had been a master of the hostile takeover. He looked at this new, blended, complicated family, built from the wreckage of 2 old ones. He realized this was his greatest acquisition. Not a takeover, but a merger, an equal partnership, and the terms were joy. "Okay," Julian said, finally signaling for the check, his hand still holding Sarah's. "Let's go home. The most powerful deals aren't signed in boardrooms. The biggest mergers don't happen between corporations. They happen in the human heart. Julian Blackwood had all the money in the world, but he was bankrupt in the things that mattered. It took a 7-year-old's grief and a waitress who was brave enough to speak the truth to show him what real wealth was. We all have locked rooms inside us, griefs we're too scared to face, apologies we're too proud to make. The story of Julian, Leo, and Sarah reminds us that the bravest thing we can ever do is turn the key. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button so we know to make more like it. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you never miss a story. What did you think of Julian's transformation? Let me know in the comments below.